Hi, everyone. I want to start out by welcoming you to one of the satellite offices of Malaprops at this point. My name's Stephanie. I'm the event director. I'm working from home right now. And one of the things we're doing is bringing authors directly to you since we can't have you in the store. And that's something we're actually really glad that we're able to do. And we so appreciate you tuning in today. We appreciate you purchasing books from our website and supporting us and supporting the India in your area if you're tuning in from somewhere else. It's really important right now, and we know everyone has a lot to think about and a lot to worry about at the moment. And we just want you to know that we hope that you are all staying safe and well, and that we're grateful for you. So thank you so much for tuning in and for spending whatever time with us you can, and spending time with your local bookstore and supporting other local businesses in your area, and nonprofits and the people in your life. All of that's really important right now. So we appreciate it. So today we are going to be recording a conversation, and as you watch it, you unfortunately won't have a live Q&A, but I think the conversation is going to provide a lot of interesting information for you, and you'll get to see two great authors talk to each other about their books and what they do, and I know it'll be a great event, even though we can't all be together at the same time. So I'd like to start by introducing our authors today. First, we have Ellen O'Connell Whittet. And Ellen, I just realized I did not ask you to confirm the pronunciation of your last name.
You got it right. Whittet. I always tell people that it's like getting jiggy with it.
Awesome. Great. So Ellen O'Connell Whittet, author of What You Become in Flight, a memoir. Ellen, do you mind if I go ahead and mention that you are getting ready to have a baby?
It's fine, yeah.
That's happening in the next week. Is the
well, I'm doing
so we're
so.
You're due in a week, so we are especially excited to have you here today, right before that big excitement, and it adds a whole other perspective to what's happening in the world right now. I'm sure as well. So look forward to hearing about that. Ellen is an essayist whose work has appeared in The Atlantic, Vulture, Buzzfeed, Salon, and more. And she has written a lyrical and meditative memoir chronicling how, as a professional ballerina, she suffered a career-ending injury, suffered from an eating disorder, and how she rebuilt her future afterwards. So we're really pleased to have Ellen with us here today. Also joining us today is Amy Jo Burns. Amy Jo is the author of the memoir Cinderland and Shiner, a new novel coming from Riverhead Books. Her writing has appeared in the Paris Review Daily, Tin House, Ploughshares, Gay Magazine, Electric Literature, Literary Hub, and the anthology Not That Bad. We are so pleased to have you with us as well, Amy Jo.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to the two of you to get started and read a little bit and talk to each other about what you do. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. So I think that I'm going to read a little bit from this memoir. It came out April 14th. What You Become in Flight has this beautiful ballet dancer. I had to work with a graphic designer to make sure that her feet were correct in the picture because
I love that.
Once a dancer, always a dancer. So I think I'm going to read a little bit, and then Amy Jo and I will talk, and then we'll switch over to her beautiful novel that I just actually finished up this morning, and we'll talk about that, and then see where we are.
Sounds great.
Okay. So the part I'm going to read is from when I was about 15, and was cast in the ballet of Don Quixote. I played the role of Cupid, and we had two ballet dancers come from the Kirov and the Bolshoi Ballet to stage the ballet on our very small town little school. So this is from that section, and this is about an understudy, and yeah, you'll see. Okay, so the very small costume I was to wear as Cupid smelled like cigarette smoke and had small gauzy wings. Upstairs, above the studio, the seamstress and Olga pulled the fabric away from my skin. "It's too big here," Olga said, "and not big enough here." I stood on a stool and turned around, and then when I stepped down, they looked at my measurements with genuine concern. The costume mistress pinned me in, and I told myself that although the pins made the costume feel tight, by the performance, I'd make sure it was loose again by losing some weight. I wanted to be able to take a full breath and see the folds of fabric over my sternum when I exhaled. My costume, I realized, must fit for the ballet to go on. Without my costume, we could not have my scene, and without my scene, there could be no performance. Caitlin, who was my understudy, tried it on after and showed me the places where it was too big for her, even after it was pinned for me. This is not a story where someone crashes or falls or is beat up. This is a story where Caitlin pushed her hands into my feet each day until one day she sat on them instead, and I didn't protest. After all, I wanted them to curve toward the floor, like a body bends against the cold. When Caitlin sat, there was a gentle and slow crack. We were sitting in the hallway before a class in our rubber pants, and girls around us heard it too. They lay on their backs with their legs in the air or pushed against walls, forcing their stretches a little more. There were bodies everywhere, and they all froze for the second when we heard the crack inside my foot, and then the second was a long time passing. "Oops," Caitlin said, dramatically grimacing, her hand covering my feet. I was silent and focused inward or downward to the sharp and steady pain in my right foot, and began counting how many days were left until our performance to assure myself that I would recover in time to dance the role of Cupid. I had accepted violence from Caitlin and inflicted it on myself. "That's okay," I told everyone. "It's my fault. I asked her to. It will be fine." I was cheerful, insistent, near tears. People stood and the air moved wildly around us. Someone handed me a bag of ice and wrapped it around my foot with a leg warmer. From inside the studio, the slow music of the Grand Allegro at the end of another class hung in the light. Caitlin was Cupid that night in our rehearsal, dancing my part as I watched from the floor. Although she knew each step, I knew she was not as good as I was and would never be allowed to dance that part. Bodies were the enemy after all, whether they belonged to us or to the girls we danced alongside. We competed for Sayat's halting, accented praise, for Olga's eyes to trace us as we danced. We were two women competing for one role. My foot didn't swell immediately, but by the time I unwrapped it in front of Olga after rehearsal, it was round and hot. Her eyes darted around, searching the room for a solution. I saw the wisps of hair at the nape of her neck when she turned her head from side to side, and in her face and her form was something I had not seen before. It looked like pride. I learned from her face the necessity of sacrificing the body to contort it into something perfect. The room was mostly dark, but for a few overhead lights buzzing, streaming over our heads and then down to the floor. She leaned over me in the semi-dark, and I knew she wanted me to give my life to ballet right then as she had done, to be tougher than physical pain, to dance anyway. With my foot still in her lap, I lay down on the floor, submitting. "I am here," my mother said, coming in the doorway, and like a miracle she was. Someone had called her to come take me to the doctor. If I had known at age 15 the exquisite violence that would follow in the years to come, 2 ruptured discs and fractured spine, the dislocated collarbone, the eating disorder, the sprains and tears and rejection, I would still have stretched out there on the floor and surrendered to ballet, would still let Olga move my foot around in her hands and assess whether I had what it took to dance through injury, while my mother worried in the doorframe. I was always powerless before the stories I told and the roles I danced in order to earn love. We went to an orthopedic surgeon soon after, and on a white exam table, I made up my mind that I would not be absent from the theater in a few weeks. That season, I had already sustained a sprained hip flexor and dislocated my pelvis. The doctor, predictably and perhaps wisely, told me not to dance, but if I had been the type to laugh in his face, I would have. I thought he was the one who didn't understand. Years later, I see that I am.
Thank you, Ellen. And I just wanted to say quickly thank you to Stephanie for giving us this opportunity because I am a huge fan of Ellen's. So to get to talk to her like this is kind of a dream come true. So thank you for that. And um, based on that section that you read, one of the questions I just wanted to hear from you about is about female pain, because I think you write so deeply about it, you know, the invisibility of it, how we use it as a form of identity. Um, I never thought about it quite that way before. And I was wondering, what are you hoping readers come away with in regard to pain and maybe the female experience or pain in art?
Oh, that's such an interesting thing to think about. I think female pain, as you said, does give us identity because I think it sort of gives us a sense that we are living fully and submitting to the ways in which the world wants us to be beautiful or powerful or whatever. Like nothing comes easy. You know, I even think about like the fact of shaving my legs in the morning or something. And it's like something that wouldn't call it pain, but it's sort of a pain to have to do it. Just the different standards that we're held to are painful and time consuming and require contorting ourselves into positions that don't feel, that don't feel natural to us. I think like living naturally is something that is sort of counter to being a woman. So I hope that people come away with like sort of noticing their pain and also listening to their pain, that pain tells us a story about our bodies and about our lives. And the pain grows the more we ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we listen to it, I think the more we can hear our own story and tell our own story by just sort of honoring, the story of how our bodies feel or how our psyches, emotions, whatever feel.
Yeah, that's so interesting because one of the things that I got from your book is that pain is almost the side character to the choice about whether you're going to actually talk about it. And there's this virtue that comes with silence around pain. So there's a few points in the book where I think where you sort of just acknowledge it, which seems like such a healthy thing, but then you're punished for it, you know?
Yeah, it's like the idea, I think a lot of athletes have this too, of dancing through pain or, playing sports through pain, or the idea that pain somehow makes us more noble.
Yeah.
It seems like we're working harder, when in fact what I think it means is that we're working counter to who we are, or to what we can do. So yeah, acknowledging pain is acknowledging, like half of what it is to be human, or sometimes more than half of what it is to be human. I think about like where we are right now and what we're all living through. And I think for all of us, this is more painful than it is anything else. We see like stories of human resilience and triumph. And sometimes that feels a little bit like emotional suppression if we're looking on the bright side too soon. I think that that's really natural, that we want to find a silver lining to things that are going on. But pain is always there, and it's always below the surface, even in happiness, because we know we could lose something that we love, or we know that life is tenuous and fragile and worth protecting. So I think acknowledging pain, is just acknowledging that you're a human being with a beating heart that feels something.
Mm-hmm. Which is interesting because when you think about what dance is, I think that's very much what dance is sort of acknowledging humanity and having those emotions, right?
Yeah. I mean, definitely. And it got to a point for me, at least, where I felt pain more than I felt anything else. Like you feel joy alongside it, then it might put the pain in perspective. But I, after a while, just felt like, no, this only hurts. This is only hard. But I think that that's taught me to listen to, like, to sort of seek out, like, does this make me happy, or does this only hurt in areas of my life too? And that's been helpful, just sort of like, giving pain that kind of power.
I also have a lot of craft related questions, because the book is so beautifully constructed, and as Stephanie said, it's so lyrical. I'm a huge fan of literary memoir, as you know.
Wrote one.
And one of the things that I loved about how the book begins is that it's this shared narrative. And it's such between you're telling your story, but in order to do that, you have to tell your mother's story, and you're telling your grandmother's story. And I think it's such a unique and powerful storytelling technique that's very specific to memoir. So I was wondering what it was like to tell those stories of your parents and grandparents, and if there was anything you learned that surprised you.
I think it was really difficult to tell those stories, especially of people who in my family who have died, that I wasn't able to verify with them. Am I telling your story the way you would want? Because it is my story, but only insofar as it matters to me and to my life. And there's obviously so much that I don't know, or that my mother couldn't even tell me about her mother or her older sister. But when I was thinking about, through the process of writing this memoir, you think a lot about who along the way could have stepped in to change the story. And I remember when I was working on it, one of the questions that came up a couple times with my agent or my editor was like, you had this eating disorder in ballet, like how did people not notice it or pay attention to it? And I don't know that it's that they didn't notice it, but I think eating disorders, for example, are sort of like addictions where you get really good at being sneaky about them or hiding them. And it was a really tough conversation to have with my parents. Like, hey, I was a teenager and like just didn't have a full meal for years. What did you think? Because I don't remember them particularly stepping in or doing anything. And I think that all of us sort of had to tell ourselves stories, about like, oh, she's just dancing a lot and so is thin or something, in order to just be okay with how brutal ballet was for me. But I think that asking like who could have stepped in and changed the story is interesting, like insofar as it allows you to trace who was involved in the story before I inherited it. And so one thing I was thinking is like, I was put in ballet lessons when I was 6, and I really wanted to take ballet lessons, but where did I see ballet? Where was I exposed to ballet? Why ballet? And I think a lot of it has to do with sort of like a status thing. I think, it's a very Anglo-European art form, or just Western European art form. And it had to do with my grandmother, I think, loved it and wanted my mom and her older sister to take ballet lessons, because I think that as somebody who had been raised during the Depression, like said something to her, about her, like, we have escaped our economic circumstances, we have risen above, and ballet really represented that. And I think that idea of ballet's status got passed down through the generations. And one thing I think about sometimes is I'm about to have a baby in a week and it's a girl, and I just think like, I'm so glad that I sort of got ballet out of my system, so that if she loves it and she wants to take it, then that's great. I'll be happy to, put her in lessons. But I also hope that there are other kinds of dance that she does instead. And I think my family didn't, like, it wasn't about the joy of movement. It had a lot to do with sort of the status of ballet specifically, and the sort of inherited womanhood and femininity of ballet, the kind of gauziness and lightness of a dancer. Said something to these generations of women in my family about like what it was to be a beautiful woman. And I, before I was even able to like notice that, I bought into it. So in terms of telling their story, I wanted to tell the truth about that, how I experienced inheriting that from them, but I also...
We're back after a little pause for some technical difficulties, because, it's the internet, and we're on Zoom, and we got to roll with it. So we're going to pick back up with Amy Jo, who has a couple more questions.
Yes, I do. So for anybody who hasn't read the book yet,
there's so much in the book is about the parallels between language and the body, and sort of this loss of dance that's a huge period of mourning, but it also opens up your life in a really incredible way. And you know, you write at the beginning of that the text of your diary was your body, and that your introduction to writing was kind of trying to discover your origin story as a dancer. So I'm wondering, maybe if you can tell us how your relationship to ballet and to your body changed as a result of writing the memoir.
Yeah, I think that what I realized is I still really love ballet. Like I think before I was writing it, I have never taken another class. Like I walked out of my last class and have just never gone back, because I always think it would just be so weird to do something casually that it's like dating someone you were married to. Like
Yeah.
there's something that's like, I would look in the mirror and just feel sad that I can't do all the things that I used to be able to do. But I have started dancing again, and that was something that really came out of this memoir, just not ballet. But I also, like, I went to New York about 2 years ago, and one of the only things I really wanted to do was go to New York City Ballet. And I was like, that's so weird, because I'm writing this memoir about how ballet kind of like ruined my body, and like, you know, like I had to sort of rebuild who I was after leaving it. But I really realized that we all have our problematic faves, you know, whether you watch like Bachelor or, you know, go see New York City Ballet or whatever, you know, we all do these things where we're like, I feel some conflicting forces about my desire to engage with this, and also with this kind of femininity, with this expression of womanhood. So yeah, that's certainly one thing. And in terms of language, you know, there's so much that you can say with your body that you can't say how it feels. I was even thinking about this recently with childbirth, because I keep asking, like, you know, my mother or like our midwives or something will talk about having contractions, and I just keep asking, what does a contraction feel like? And it's like everyone I ask gives me a different answer, because there's sort of this, like, you know, this wisdom knowing that is beyond language, or that language, you know, you can say, well, it's sort of like this, like it's, you know, you can use sort of a metaphor or a comparison, but you can't really say what it's like, and you can't say what it's like for someone else. So I think so much of what we go through physically is something that resides like in our cells, that's beyond language, but it's a fun puzzle to try to figure out how to say it or how to express it. I think that that's part of the excitement of writing.
All right, I'll just ask you one more, and this is maybe for some of the writers that we have listening. You write about how dancers get very accustomed to putting on characters, right, and filling in roles to play. And so I'm wondering what it was like for you creating yourself as a character on the page in the memoir, and yeah, what that process was like for you, I guess.
Yeah, it's such a strange thing, because it is so performative. I mean, even though you're writing your own true story of your life, you're not really yourself. I mean, obviously there's so much you keep off the page, or you know, shine a light on some things and not others. I remember I had a professor in grad school tell me, like, you're funny in person and you're never funny in your writing.
Oh wow. Thank you.
I know. Well, I don't really know how to be funny in my writing, because I don't, like, that feels performative too, and so much of what makes up our personality is spontaneous or based on sort of like when we talk about the difficulties of having this sort of like technological interface right now. It's like, I've never met you, Amy Jo, but like, this is the closest I've gotten to me. I mean, it's just, it's it's interesting all the different layers of separation between us and, you know, being fully known or making ourselves known. So I think what I thought about was vulnerability, for sure. you know, if there are people that I'm bringing up as sort of antagonists, like the understudy who sat on my foot, I'm more interested in my own antagonism than I am in her, because I don't really know her. I don't really know what she, you know, I think we were both part of a system of pitting women against each other, and we're too young to acknowledge it or even really realize it. So part of it is like looking at my own faults and looking at my own failures, and also seeing how those are also not totally representative of me. I mean, you can only represent so much. And I was thinking about like the next book I want to write, and I was thinking that I wanted to write a memoir, and it's like so weird to think, well, I just wrote a memoir, like how could there be something else to say? But it's like there's this whole other area of, you know, my upbringing that like didn't make it into the book because it wasn't relevant to ballet, and ballet was really the focus. So yeah, I think just showing the readers what you want to show them is both honest and dishonest as an act of writing, but it's really necessary. I mean, you're not giving people the whole pie, you're just giving them one tiny slice of the pie and saying, you enjoyed it.
What I thought of as I was reading was, it just is so beautifully done, because we get the sense of Ellen putting on her costumes as a dancer, and the process of writing it, I feel like we get to witness Ellen, the writer, take them off in a really beautiful way. So
although, you know, there are other costumes you wear as a writer. Which is, I mean, I don't know that we call them costumes, but sort of like other ways that we write ourselves onto the page that are maybe as much of costumes. But yeah, there is a lot of putting on and taking off of costumes. And I think that that's so true of being a woman too. You know, there are different costumes that we're wearing that I think it's the work of our lifetime to try to figure out which ones we actually want to be wearing and which ones we have no use for.
Then I think as a writer, you need to know where that line is, where the line begins of me as the person who's like interacting with the people I love versus this person that I'm putting on the page. Otherwise, you know, you don't really know what story you're telling, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we're much better versions of ourselves on the page too. We're edited, you know, we're saying there's sort of a moral to what we're saying, or maybe not a moral, but at least a point to what we're saying. Whereas in person, it's like, you know, you're dealing with your internet connection and the dog would stop barking and like yelling at, you know, your spouse about something or whatever. You know, there are so many things that are not worthy of writing, even though they're very much who we are.
Because there's no perspective at that moment in real life, in the present moment. I mean, what I love about memoir is that you're sort of seeing the author at 2 points. You're seeing them from the point that they're writing at, and then you see them at the point that they're remembering and thus writing about it, which it doesn't when does that happen? That doesn't happen in real life.
Oh, I know, and you have to have that kind of remove, I think, in order to be able to make something bigger out of, you know, the everyday living.
Agreed. Okay.
So do you want to read to us now?
Yes, I can read.
Great.
Briefly. I'll just show you really quickly. This is my novel, Shiner. It's coming out May 5th from Riverhead, and it is a book about women's legends, miracles, and moonshine. So briefly is how I'll describe it, but I'm just going to read for you the prologue, which is titled True Story. Making good moonshine isn't that different from telling a good story, and no one tells a story like a woman. She knows that legends and liquor are best spun from the back of a pickup truck after nightfall, just as she knows how to tell a story slowly, the way whiskey drips through a sieve. Moonshine earned its name from spending its life concealed in the dark, and no one understands that fate more than I do. Beyond these hills, my people are known for the kick in their liquor and the poverty in their hearts. Overdoses, opioids, unemployment. Folks prefer us this way. Dumb-mouthed with yellow teeth and cigarettes. Dumb-minded with carboys of whiskey and broken-back Bibles. But that's not the real story. Here's what hides behind the beauty line along West Virginia's highways. A fear that God has forgotten us. We live in the wasteland that coal has built, where trains eat miles of track. Our men slip serpents through their fingers on Sunday mornings and pray for God to show himself while our wives wash their husbands' underpants. Here's what hides behind my beauty line. My father wasn't just one of these men. He was the best. Since word of his sin spilled down the mountain, folks have split from the highway, hoping to catch a glimpse of a fallen hero. They believe that this miner's outpost, shriveled since the coal barons claimed it 40 years ago in the 1970s, still holds the key to my father's miracles. Welcome to Trap, the new sign outside city limits says. What it doesn't? Come here to fall in love. Come here to fear for your life. Strangers ask what I can tell them about the snake handler and his wife. They want myths and legends. They aren't tempted by the truth. It's a true story, I begin, roosting in the back of an old truck. I swear it. Then I tell them that these woods can turn eerie or romantic, depending on the company you keep. It's an autumn night and the fire is lit. Moonshiners sneak in their final runs of whiskey while young women like me tell old tales. The sun sets early. Along the outskirts of Trap, you'll find me standing in a constellation of four-wheel drive trucks in the woods behind the old Sawwet Motel. The mountains hover at my back. The story of the snake handler's daughter began when I just turned 15. I knew then little of the outside world my father kept from me. Ours is an oral civilization, I used to hear him say, and it's dying. He blamed coal, he blamed heroin, he never blamed himself. He thought he had the only tales worth telling, and he never understood what my mother had run from all her life because she'd been born a woman. The truth turns sour if it idles too long in our mouths. Stories, like bottles of shine, are meant to be given away.
That's so beautiful. It's so interesting hearing that prologue again after finishing the book this morning. And seeing all the seeds that you plant for the story that unfolds. It's such a beautiful novel. I mean, talk about lyrical. It's like every
thank you.
sentence just has such song in it. And I love in that prologue. So this is the story of 15-year-old, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Who lives in the mountains of West Virginia with her parents. And there's a pretty small cast of characters, actually, although it kind of is bigger than you anticipate in the first chapter. It feels very sort of close and closed about the world that she lives in. I mean, all the fact that she's living on a mountain that she sort of like can't escape from felt particularly resonant reading it in a time when we're all a little bit caged in.
I never would have said that these characters would be so relatable when the book came out.
I know. I mean, the desire to get out and like to escape and live a bigger life. But on the first page, I think like your second sentence or something you just read was that no one tells a story like a woman. And I'm wondering what that means to you, but also in the scope of your novel. Like, what kinds of stories do women tell, and why is it that no one else can tell a story like a woman? You said it's slow and like the drip of whiskey.
Yeah.
What kind of stories are these?
So I think I had a lot of different things running through my mind when I was thinking about what I wanted this story to be. And I mentioned that it's kind of about women's legends, and I wanted to write something that felt like a myth or sort of felt like it was being told around a campfire, but it wasn't focused on men. And because I feel like a lot of the myths and legends that we have are so focused on men and this hero's journey. And what I didn't want to do was just take this sort of like male narrative arc and slap a woman on it. I wanted to call attention to, how does a woman really experience her life? How does she carry her past with her? And that's why I kind of wanted to tell a story that went backwards more than forward. So the way that the novel is constructed is sort of like in a circle. We start in the present, and then we go back, and then we see the past from somebody else's perspective, and we kind of circle back, because I think there's something about the way a woman carries those things with her, and they're sort of always ever present, that I wanted to figure out how to give that its own narrative arc. And I guess to give you kind of a tangible example, one of the inspirations for the book was a long time ago, I read this wonderful book called Salvation on Sand Mountain. It's by Dennis Covington, and it's a nonfiction account of Covington, who's a journalist who goes to Alabama to report on a snake handling preacher who gets convicted of murder when his wife dies from a snake bite. And the book is incredible. He just writes with so much love and respect and grace about this town and this way of life and the faith. And when I finished the book, though, I just felt this huge loss that the only way we know the preacher's wife is through her husband's sins. And I think that's a huge loss for us all. So I started thinking about, if a woman like that might tell a story, what kind of stories would she tell? So that's kind of where that came from.
That's so interesting. Yeah, knowing the plot and what unfolds. That's such an interesting origin story. You're talking a lot about sort of mythology. Towards the end, you write of stories and words. They weren't magic like my father's, but they were real, which I think is such an interesting distinction. What's magic versus what's real. And I was also thinking about this sort of in terms of publicizing a book. So much of it is about like mythologizing your own book. Like, what is the origin story? And I've seen you making moonshine cookies, on Instagram that are like part of sort of like the birth of this book. Even just thinking about like the magic of sort of like the day you found out it was someone wanted to make it into a book.
Yeah.
All these things are so exciting. But how do you see the sort of magic, myth making, and the truth of writing a story? I mean, in the end, Ren decides that she has the truth rather than the magic, but I still think that she has faith. So I don't think faith is necessarily tied to magic, even though that's maybe what her serpent handling father would say.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think part of Ren's coming of age is reckoning with what it means to have her own faith in her own life that doesn't look like what her father has. And for him, he crosses, I think, this line of faith into fundamentalism, because he's sort of like, this way that I do it is the way that it needs to be done. And any other way is not the right way. And what ends up happening is that the people that are closest to him pay the price for his ego. And I wanted to create some characters that see what is sort of underneath that and kind of show not just the fallout, but how those other characters are going to kind of rise from it. And to have a mythology that's born out of that sort of like, the prevalent myth is of this, snake handling preacher who gets struck by lightning and he's sort of touched by God and he's blessed. But I wanted to show really what it means to have miracles that you hold at your fingertips that come from the people who love you and give their lives for you, and how that is sort of a real kind of faith as opposed to what Ren's father is experiencing.
And even in order to keep his myth going, his origin story, and also sort of like his magic, his ability as a preacher, he's got to obscure a lot of truth that we end up finding out. And every time we would find out, like, oh, this very sort of concrete thing explains why this other very sort of magical seeming thing happened, I was like, that's actually so much more satisfying than the magic, even though it sort of ended the mystery of the magic. But I just thought that I was just struck by how important his own myth was, that he had to lie in order to keep his myth going.
Yeah, and I think he wasn't even aware, that he was kind of having to lie to himself. And I just wanted to get across that who pays the price for that sort of, narrow thinking of God, is like the people around him. So
yeah, I think that was so beautifully handled. So you wrote a really wonderful, moving memoir, Cinderland, about growing up in the Rust Belt and the stories that girls, including you, told. I guess I'm still thinking about the stories that women tell and the ways
Yeah.
they tell them and why, about sexual abuse happening to and around you. And both Cinderland and Shiner center young girls' stories.
Mm-hmm.
Shiner switches perspective, so we begin and end with Ren and her first person account, and then in the middle we have two other stories that are told actually in third person. So I was interested that this girl who was sort of the same age maybe that, you know, more or less that you were in Cinderland, was
Yeah.
the one whose voice you really inhabited. How is using those teenage girl voices different in a novel versus a memoir? It seems like you'd have to kind of slip both into both, you know, become both.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I do think when I start out writing, at least part of the person that I'm writing for is that 15 or 16-year-old version of myself that is very afraid and not sure how to express it. So I think of like, what kind of books did she really need? And that's kind of where I begin. Ren was actually the hardest character for me to write, even though she's the only one that's in first person. You know, the other two characters that are point of view voices are told in third person, as you said. And I think what is particular about her is that she lives a very secluded life. So she almost doesn't know what she doesn't know. I mean, when the book opens and she's sort of on the mountain, you're getting a sense of her life, and it feels maybe like it's set back in 1950 until you see her go down into the mountain and people have cell phones and they're looking at her. And so I think a hard thing to get across with her is sort of like how she is so secluded, and there's an innocence to that, but because all she has to look at is these adults in her life, she becomes very wise about human behavior. And I think that's something particular actually to the way that young women are. You have to kind of be a quick study about what's safe and what's dangerous. And that's something I think I look at in both Cinderland and Shiner, is like, there's this idea of what's presented that isn't safe, and then there's like the real danger, and they're not the same thing.
That's really interesting. Yeah. Yeah, because I think that both young girls, you, but also Ren, sort of have to, speaking of lying to keep up a mythology, have to sort of lie to cover up the danger that's much more real than if they had just told the truth, but that's what they believe they have to do.
Yeah, and you know, something I realized, not while I was writing Cinderland, but when I published Cinderland, when I wrote Cinderland, I was so hard on myself for the lie that I told. And then when I published it, I had so many people tell me these stories about how lies can save your life.
Yeah.
And it just, hearing it from somebody else, it just made me have so much more compassion for myself that I could never give myself before I'd heard those similar stories from other people. And I think the characters in the novel have this longing and yearning for the truth, but at the same time they represent it comes at a real cost, and they're kind of constantly walking that tightrope of like survival versus like what's really real, you know, here.
Yeah, and especially in a small town with not a lot of economic opportunity, it seems like, you know, you like the lie that you think you have to tell to preserve the life that you know seems even important, because you don't sort of understand or, you know, have access to other opportunities that could come from telling the truth, because you know, live in such an insular community, and it would be so disruptive.
And you know, part of Cinderland for me was the fact that you kind of know from the beginning that I leave, and I think it's the fact that I left and I was looking back that gives that book its heartbeat. And then in Shiner, there's this question I think I wanted to face, like, if somebody wanted to have a real change of heart, but they're not going to leave, what would that look like? Because I think for a lot of people, you know, geographic mobility is a myth, right? So I wanted to play with ideas of like, what does it mean to be ambitious for something other than money? Or what does it mean to love home and never leave it, so those were some things that I'd questioned in Cinderland that I think I took I was able to take in a new direction in the novel because it's fiction.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I emailed you at some point while I was reading it that I couldn't wait to find out what happened to Ren, because the way you write it, it's like you write up until this one night
Yeah.
from her point of view. And then the next story we get kind of goes up until that one night. So I was like, are we ever going to find out what happened after this one night? And it's not what I expected. I mean, I think that I was seeing it from the point of view of somebody who didn't live in the mountains of West Virginia and feel that kind of like pull of the people and the place that the characters who live there do. And it was really moving to see, to see them stay or to see them make choices about, I don't know, about their lives that are different from like what an outsider would want for them or something, because, imposing my own values or my own desires on characters who have such different lives and experiences was just, it was such an interesting sort of tension in reading of it. I want everybody to like be able to go be a writer and
Yeah.
And
I think it's that was exactly the sort of things that I was thinking about as well when I was wanting to craft a story that felt true. And I think a lot of times that this is sort of alluded to in the prologue that I read, but there is a real sense, I think, in Appalachia of this sort of like outside looking in, let us define you. And I think there's a parallel between that and then also the way women feel, or sort of this outside in, let me define you. So I kind of wanted to like throw that out and say, if we want to define ourselves, what would it look like?
Exactly. Yeah, and that was so moving about it. I mean, the fact that she didn't like go to New York and get a job in publishing at the end, and that was a success story, which would have been a very false, ending, or a very false sort of thing for Ren to want to do. So I love that.
Because I think for the people in the novel, what success means is like making something with your hands, right? That you value, and that the people that you love value as well. So I wanted to get across what that different kind of like life affirming success might look at that doesn't include like, let's move to New York kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that was wonderful. I actually saw in the end, I was curious about this. You thanked in your acknowledgments, you thanked your parents for their stories.
Yeah.
Were they from West Virginia or from Appalachia?
So my dad grew up, very close to where I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, which is not too far from West Virginia. And my mom grew up in very rural Maine. So they both sort of in very different areas, had very kind of similar experiences about what they had access to. So, and my dad is somebody who makes everything with his hands. And so he's just a great person to be like, if I wanted to make this, what would I do? And he just is somebody who's very talented that way. So I wanted to get across that kind of self-reliance in the book without the bravado that some might assume would go along with that. But my mom is like great to talk to about country music, what brand of cigarettes people would smoke, what kind of car tires they have. It's like really fun to do that with them when I'm working on a project, to talk with them.
Yeah, I know. When I assumed, I mean, I because I'd read your memoir, I knew that you weren't from West Virginia, but I was like, she's really wearing, speaking of costumes, you're really wearing a costume and speaking from the point of view of somebody raised in, I think, a much sort of smaller town than you were.
Yeah.
So that was, it was just so noteworthy and moving. I have sort of a non-book related question. Yeah. I saw on Twitter that you're keeping a journal of daily sorrows.
Yeah.
Which I think is so wonderful. I mean, I've seen people who've written like, gratitude journals or journals of daily delights or whatever. Yeah. But can you tell us, I want to know more about that. I mean, why is it important for you to document your sorrows and your losses right now? And what are some of your sorrows that you're writing down?
I am, for better or worse, not a melancholy person, but I think my sadnesses stick to me in a way that maybe my joys don't. And something I've been just working on as a person is that I don't think sadness or grief and joy are opposites. I think that they are partners. And if I don't want to shortchange my joy, I can't shortchange my sorrow. And that has been, 30 plus years in the making to even get to that point, that didn't want to listen to that voice in me that's like depressed. So I think part of just keeping this sort of daily account of like, this is what I'm sad about, is a way to give that depressed sort of part of me that's very important a voice, and to let her know that it's important that she's listened to. And I think just the process of writing it down helps me feel like I've got something else that holds it. And then that sort of, it's weird for me, it just frees up this room to be like, okay, and then I can appreciate whatever else it is in my life. It's just a way of me letting myself know, you're presenting sadness, but your sadness isn't all that you are. Because I've had so many people be like, well, you need to think about what you're grateful for and what you're thankful for. And it never works for me, because it's not that I'm not thankful for things. I think it's the act of being thankful that sort of just leads me to this, I don't know, place of sorrow. But anyway, I mean, it will be things like, they are very petty sometimes.
The pettier, the better. Yeah.
But it'll just be things that like, I mean, if I had it on me, I would read some, but my son's birthday, he turned 5. All he wanted for his birthday was to have his friends over for a Lego play date. And it didn't happen because everybody's at home. And I was like, I'm putting that down. I think something book related, when you like ask somebody for a blurb and they sort of like back away from you, that's in there a few times.
Or even just around publishing a book. When
Yes.
even
in perfect circumstances, there's something sad about that reality, the dream becoming a reality. I don't know.
Yeah. Especially now. I mean, we can't even like go drink champagne with our loved ones because we're all separated.
Yes. And so, I mean, I think that's exactly it. I think it's a way to sort of wade through, like I remember the moment that, we live very close to New York City, and the moment, my husband, Matt, said to me, we're going to know somebody who's going to die. And we have. And just that moment, it just hit me. And so there's something just about that process of writing that out alongside me saying, I can't get so-and-so a copy of my book, and just saying, we're just going to let them sort of coexist on the page. And then I think it's allowed me to just sort of make room for other things in life instead of having that sadness not have a voice,
Well,
Now all my dirty secrets.
it made me want to do it. I actually got a journal. I'm not much of a journaler, and I still have not unwrapped the journal, but I got one after I saw that you were keeping this, because I was like, that's something worth writing down.
Yeah, you'll have to let me know what you think, because I think the list form is what's good for me, because otherwise I get very like overwhelmed with what I'm feeling. So let me know.
Okay.
And it can be a good thing, I think, through early days of having a child too, because even that is sort of like a weird time of loss of what you knew and not sure what is coming,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It was so good to hear that prologue again and hear more about, writing this. I have so many more questions that I'll have to ask you, another time, mostly about just like how you constructed this book, because it's so interesting how it's written, and the point of view and the timeline and all of that. But I really encourage people who have not read Shiner, well, it's not out till next week, so that's probably most of you, to get a copy, because it's just such a gorgeous, I mean, it's like a world that I didn't want to leave, even though it's a painful world where, you know, women don't have many opportunities. I still just felt like I was so cocooned in this world. And when I closed the, you know, the last page, I just was like, well, what am I supposed to do with myself? Which is, I think, a good question to ask when you know, when you read a really beautiful, consuming novel like that. So.
Oh, that's like the best feeling in the world for a writer, to give somebody like a book hangover. I think that
Yeah,
that's the
exactly.
best.
That's what it is. I don't want to start another book today because I still think today belongs to Shiner. So.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll take today.
Okay.
Hey, thank you both so much. A book hangover. That's a perfect. I think that's a perfect note to end on, because I think that's certainly what we love to give people, you know, at Malaprops. And it's been such a pleasure to listen to you two talk today about your books and about your experiences and your perspectives and your sorrows. So appreciative that we're able to share this with other folks out in the world. Thank you both so much.
Thank you
Yeah,
for the time.
really, really appreciate it. So to everyone out there who's watching, we just want to give a big thanks again to Ellen Whittet. Her book is What You Become in Flight, and it is available now, and you can order it on our website, malaprops.com. Things are a little bit slower now than usual, but we will get it out to you. And also, of course, want to thank Amy Jo Burns, sorry, Amy Jo. Amy Jo Burns, who gave Ellen a book hangover. With her new book, which is coming out on May 5th, and that is a novel called Shiner.
I wish I could hold up the book for you now, but I just have my Kindle. So.
Yeah.
There we go.
And that book is also available on our website at malaprops.com, and you can go ahead and pre-order it now. We hope that all of you stay safe and well and enjoy some good books while you might have some time to do that right now. And thank you so much again for joining.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.